Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we are going to continue our series for the basic GM setup and suggestions. We also will cover some of the more unique aspects of Fantasy Grounds. Just wanted to touch bases with you guys about what we covered last time. We did a very basic raw kind of setup for combat. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go back over a couple things, not too much, but I have my session 0 notes down here, which I had a couple episodes ago we set this up. But basically, I'm going to use this. I can bring up my combat tracker, and I can bring up all my characters this way, and kind of go right back to where I left off as far as the session goes. If I go to session 1, I have my session 0 notes also pinned there. But I have the Sword Coast player map that I can bring up. And then there was the combat that we were running. So I'm going to go through the end of that. We're going to pretend like the combat's been resolved. And then we'll go from there. So essentially we were doing most of the combat out of the combat tracker. There was no map. It's just, theater of the mind. Let's see, we didn't even get through round 1. So we're just going to pretend like the goblins have been dispatched. One of the goblins is survived, and in this particular session, we will kind of pretend that this one of these goblins, maybe the runt or the smallest of the group, he's wounded, but he's not dead. We'll just say these other guys have perished in battle, so we will get rid of those on the combat tracker just by right-clicking on this little pin on the right-hand side, and then clicking on the garbage can delete item. So that will remove the combatants or any dead individuals or people that have no longer have any relevance or whatever to the combat. You can remove those. So we're going to leave number 3, and I guess they captured him. The party captured him. But what we're going to do is kind of fast forward. So they captured the goblin. They survived the battle, and now we're going to take a short rest. So we'll go to menu. And then in the rest area, there's a rest option, which is this padlock with an eye over it. So you can do a long rest or a short rest. So the party is elected to do a short rest. They don't have any major wounds. Matter of fact, the human noble only has 1 hit point loss. But at low levels, that can make a difference. So if he elects to use his natural recovery, he has a recovery die that he can roll. So if I double click on that, it will do like a natural healing process for a short rest for an hour. And that'll essentially help him. That's basically binding his wounds and that sort of thing. So no longer bleeding, and his wounds are now taken care of. Plus, you'll be able to rest, calm down, get your blood pressure down, all those sort of things. So that's just one of the things that can happen during a game that you might have to employ before going on to the next segment. They may even elect to do a long rest, which would involve camping and such and putting out watches and all that sort of thing. But this would kind of give the party a chance to recollect. Maybe they're going to question the goblin. And one of the aftermaths of this particular adventure is that this goblin might give them information regarding their next location, which is the Kragma hideout. So this is basically sort of ends the first segment of the adventure, and I'm kind of fast forwarding through it because I don't want to play through the whole entire thing. But essentially, we ran a little bit of combat through the combat tracker. Just kind of showed you can drag and drop through the combat tracker from your character sheets back and forth. You don't have to have tokens and maps and stuff. You can do it all from the combat tracker. This time, though, we're going to actually go through and take a look at that and do it. So what I want to do is take and bring up something to use for a map, and that will be for the Kragma hideout, because that actually comes with the map. This first encounter doesn't. But before we move on to that, I want to show you a couple things in the party sheet. So in the party sheet, there is a place where you award loot and those sort of things. So not everything is going to have treasure in this particular adventure or any other adventures. However, if you think that your party deserves treasure or should find a few coins or something like that, you can always make your own parcels, which is a treasure parcel. I'm not going to go in on how to do that, but essentially you can make your own treasure up if you want. Or if you're too lazy or you don't want to take the time to do it, you can actually go on the DM's Guild. There's a bunch of series of modules. This is only a suggestion. You don't need to have these. But there are the monster loot modules made for Fantasy Grounds. They were adapted. Essentially, it gives you the loot or the potential treasure that the creatures would have on them. So it has almost every creature in the module, and then there's a loot thing for them, like a table or just basic loot, so that you can drag and drop that into your inventory, so that your players have options to sell and scavenge whatever stuff they want from the loot. So if I go into my library and I open up the modules, go to activation, I can type in Phandelver, and there is a third-party module that I picked up to help make this adventure a lot smoother and more immersive. So it's called Monster Loot Mines of Phandelver. So, Lost Mines of Phandelver. Okay. And there's only one mine. It's not mines. Just to let you know. Okay, so, and then there's other things here, like Sidekicks of Phandelver, Fellowship of Phandelver. There's all different kinds of things in here. There's even something for tavern keeping if your players will later on inherit the Sleeping Giant Inn, which is potential eventuality. But when you have this loaded, it actually is going to give you parcels based on the creature type. So if they defeat the goblins, and if they decide to loot them, you have an option to just grab the loot and drop it in their inventory. So this isn't part of the module. This would be something that you would supplement after the module or after the combat is done. Then you could potentially use something like this. So I'm going to go to the campaign section and go under parcels. And if you select in here the monster loot, you'll come down through here and you'll see goblins. So goblins already have a little bit of treasure set up here. So there's some arrows, there's some black leather armor, broken scimitar, broken shield. So basically it's their equipment plus some goblin teeth. If you want to unlock this, you can add a couple coins. So I might add like 11 silver, maybe 1 gold, and maybe 22 copper pieces, something like that. You can modify them by unlocking it if it's not locked. I mean, if it's not permanently locked. And then you can drag and drop this little link on the top left corner into the parcel area. And what that'll do is give you the treasure that'll be available for the party if they decide to loot the bodies. And it just kind of gives you a starting point, because otherwise you're making all this stuff on your own, which isn't a bad thing. But if you don't want to spend the time to do it, there's something like that might be helpful to run this particular game. So this is at 50%, so we'll get into this later, but basically you can sell this loot at 50% by default. You can negotiate with whoever you're selling to get a better percentage. Some of these items may not be sellable if they don't have a price. The goblin teeth, someone might want to keep those, and the arrow. So you can type whoever you want to assign it to, and then the rest of the stuff can be sold as scrap or junk or whatever. So it just depends on your session, but essentially that's where the loot would be distributed. And then you have the XP tab. So there's a couple things that happen in the first part of this section. So I'm going to go back to the session notes for session 1. And what I'm going to do is skip over to the end here where the goblin ambush was. And if you read through this, it says, you know, they'll fight to the death except for like when there's one goblin left over, he'll flee. If he survives, you can decide, you know, how you want this to go on. But it says that characters might capture one or more of the goblins by knocking them out instead of killing them. So a character can use melee weapons to knock him out, succeeding if the attack deals damage that drop him to 0 hit points, essentially knocks him out. It's non-lethal damage. Once it regains consciousness after a few minutes, a captured goblin can be convinced to share what it knows, and then there's a link that says, see what the goblins know. So you could divulge this information as you see fit, but it tells you quite a bit about the caves. It says, if the characters capture or charm any of the goblins here, the goblins can be persuaded to divulge the information. So it basically says there's about 15 goblins that dwell in the lair. The lair's then another thing says that the leader's name is Clark. He answers to King Groll, chief of the Cragmaw tribe, who dwells in the Cragmaw castle. And so there's a lot of really important information, including this one. It says the dwarf and his map were delivered to King Groll as instructed. The dwarf's human companion is being held in the eating cave in the Cragmaw hideout. So there's a lot of good information there if they decide to keep one of the goblins alive. The other thing is that they may run into some issues with the trail. So if they don't make friends with the goblin, or if they're not careful and they make their way to the Cragmaw hideout, there's a potential that they'll run into a couple traps. The traps themselves are not set up as NPC records. So if you were going to use those traps effectively, it would be nice if you actually had the actual stuff kind of set up as an NPC, like a hazard. So there's a snare, and then there's a pit. So you could essentially create these and build them into kind of like an NPC, but most of these are roleplay. However, there is some bludgeoning damage from the fall, and a dex save and a wisdom save to notice, or like perception check to notice them. So you could essentially turn those two things, those hazards, into an NPC, so it's easier for you to just drag the damage onto the players if they fail their wisdom or dex save. So that's just a something that could really be beneficial to make this a little easier. And then there's a story award here that I wanted to show you. So you got two types of awards that you're going to give your players after this encounter. So if you go to the XP tab on the party sheet, you have a story award, which is essentially if they find Cragmaw Keep. So you drag and drop this. It just says this isn't a quest. This isn't a quest as such, but it can be used to reward the players for finding the goblin's hideout. Each player will get 75 XP. If there's more than 4, just adjust it accordingly. So if I had more than 5 characters, I'd have to bring that up to 375, but in this case I don't have to. So you drag and drop that over here to the quest area, and then the encounter itself, whether it's a fight or they surrender. Oh, here's the traps. They did make them. That's good. Okay, so the traps are NPCs. My bad. Let's see what the goblins know. There we go. Here's the encounter. So the encounter itself, the reason why you make encounters in Fantasy Grounds is just so that you basically have it, at your disposal. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop that in here, which is how you give experience for combat. And when you're all done with that and you have your loot and everything, you can click award to award the encounter stuff. So each person gets 40 in this case. So I probably needed to adjust that, but nonetheless, that's what you're going to get out of there. And then for the that's for the combat, and then for the story award, yeah, each one of them gets 60. So that's basically how you handle that. So each person got around 100 XP at least. So that's pretty cool. And then you got your inventory. So if they get to a point, like if they get to Phandelver, or maybe they find a trader along the road, they can sell the equipment, and you can click on the sell items, and it'll sell everything into gold if you want. And then when you're done doing all your trading and all back and forth, and once you sell everything, you hit the down arrow, and it will distribute the coins evenly amongst the group. So that's essentially how you award stuff to your players, and the party sheet is really handy. It's nice. So this is one of your tools that you're going to use for essentially for getting set up for awarding your players. So the next part of this adventure, once they're done with that, they took a rest, and I would have given all those awards out and that sort of thing either after the last session or before this next session. So I'm going to pretend like I'm doing it right maybe an hour before the game starts. And then one other eventuality that can come up occasionally is that the goblin that they captured, they didn't want to kill him or anything like that. So there's actually going to be turned into an ally. And we'll say he only has 1 wound now, so he's healed a little bit. So Fantasy Grounds will not inherently allow you to let players control NPCs very easily. It's not a very clean process. The way you would do it is to open up the NPC record, and then you would drag this link up here on the top left to one of your players that's connected to the table, and they have to be a friendly on the combat tracker. And essentially, they'll be able to access this record, so your player makes a copy of this this goblin once it pops up on their screen, and then they can make a link down here, so whenever they want to control the goblin, they can bring that up. The only problem is you don't have a lot of agency for players, so they can move the token, they can do the attack rolls, but they can't advance the turn, and that can get really annoying if you have companion players. So before this session started, I loaded up a couple extensions. One was for the chat window to make the text a little bit bigger. That's very common, just something that's really handy, especially if your vision's not good. And then on the right-hand side of the character sheet, that extension adds a new tab called cohorts. So if you click on this green plus button, that adds a blank line. Or you can take the goblin itself and drag this record into the cohorts area. And essentially, it will give you the cohort that you're going to have. But right now, the extension isn't working quite right. It's still it still needs to be updated for Fantasy Grounds, and that's one reason why it's difficult to use extensions, because you're going to constantly run into that. As Fantasy Grounds evolves and changes, you're always going to be chasing updates for these things. So it can get a little bit annoying, initially when you're trying to do this. So this is the goblin himself. So I was trying to put the cohort on the actual goblin, which isn't right. But the goblins can have cohorts too. But if you were going to say, like, the human noble decides to take him in under his wing, you can drag and drop the goblin from the combat tracker onto this record. So I'm going to take the goblin record, drag it onto the cohorts tab on the actual player character. So if I drag and drop this goblin from the combat tracker onto the cohorts area, the goblin now is under the jurisdiction and control of the player. He can pass the turn, he can do all kinds of stuff. So this is just a convenient way for you to allow for your players to control their own companions, but frees up a lot of your time and resources as a GM. I don't normally endorse too many extensions. The only things I really use, I use Rob Tui's coding effects. I use this extension, which is the friend zone, and then I use a font extension. That's it. Anything fancier than that, it has a lot of potential to break, and I don't like chasing down or worrying about updates all the time. So that's just me, though. That's my personal preference. But anyway, so you have a way that you can control the goblin. So the goblin essentially becomes part of the group. And if you wanted to include a new player that has never played, let them play the goblin and make a character instead of an NPC, because right now it's an NPC. So you can turn the goblin into like a first level character, maybe a rogue or whatever you want him, a little warrior or something like that, and bring them through the rest of the campaign. I mean, that's something that can happen during the course of a game, which is a lot of fun, and it brings a lot more immersion when you are essentially when you're building or creating your own story. Is you'll have this agency where you can actually bring in NPCs and actually turn them into characters, which is really fun. I think it's a great way to keep the story going. And it's not your cliche, okay, we're going to kill all the goblins, take their treasure. You know, you have one left behind, he becomes a valuable ally and an asset to the party instead of a hindrance. So it can be a lot of fun. So anyways, the eventuality is that they get to the Lost Mine, through the Lost Mine of Phandelver to the Cragmaw Hideout, which is the next piece, which was the end of Session 0. So I had that already set. So here's all these different things. And then for Session 1, that was when we're actually traveling and getting to the combat part. and I have the notes for that. And at the end of there's the Kragma hideout. So this is essentially where we left off. And then we had the little mini combat, which I fast forwarded because I said, well, you know, they kind of have an idea of how to use the combat tracker from just the combat tracker standpoint. So now we're going to actually start building into the Kragma hideout encounter itself. So this will be the next encounter. This actually has 2 maps. It has a DM map that has the locations pinned to it. There's no line of sight or anything like that because it's essentially just for reference for the GM. It's usually low quality. It's not really for play so much. It's more for you to kind of take a look at. It has all the locations on it, numbered and such, and the key and all that stuff. So this is basically the DM's reference. So I'm going to pull up a new note. So this is session 2 now. And in session 2, I'm going to take from session 1, I'm going to take this Kragma hideout and drag and drop it on here. And then I'm also going to steal the map again. So here's the map for this big map that I have up right now. And then I want to go to put in the images here that we're going to use. So I'm going to grab the Kragma hideout. And that's the DM map. So I'm going to just go ahead and put DM just so I remember which is which. And then here's the player's map. So let's get the player's map up, get that all set. So the player's map is a little bit higher resolution, and it has a lot more going on with it. So generally, I like to put my maps in this top right corner. You can put them wherever you want, but that's where it's going to go. And then I'm going to drag and drop this other thing, this other link, to my notes here, so it's ready to go when I bring the screen back up for session 2. And then I might as well link session 1 here because that's where I'm getting some of the information, or at least session 0. Put session 0 there. That'll be helpful in the long run. And then after that, you know, it's up to you what other content you want to link here. But I think this is just getting to the hideout and getting inside. And then once you start going into this adventure, and use the arrow keys down here at the bottom, all these things will start coming up for you a lot easier than trying to reinvent the wheel. So here is the map here. It already has a grid on it. Most of the official content already has the grid. I'm going to link the session 2 notes right to this map because I want to be able to pop it up if I need to. That way I'm not struggling to find it, and just pop it right here on the key. And then as far as this part goes, when they get to the stream, it says when the characters cross to the east side of the stream, they can see a thicket in area 2. They can start to see around it, and this is goblin guard post. So the goblins are kind of sitting there bored and inattentive. So this is where you could potentially have another encounter. So I want to go over some of the map things, because I think that's where most people struggle with, and it really helps to understand how this stuff works. So first thing is first, the goblin. So if I open up the encounter, first I'm going to drag the encounter onto my cheat list here in case I need to get back to it quickly. And it's pinned also to the map, so if you bring up this, it brings up the story, but then you have the encounter too. So I would prefer just to pin the actual encounter if I need to. I just have it handy, ready to go. And then I know these pins kind of get in the way, so I'm going to move them because the goblins are actually, the tokens will end up here once we add them to the combat tracker. They're already pre-placed on the map. So if I'm going to close the session 2 notes, I already have it linked here. So if I need to run that encounter, I'll pop up the encounter, and as you can see, these 2 check marks are indicative of them being on the map already or attached to an encounter somewhere. And I go ahead and hit the down arrow, and this would be right before we start, or maybe right as we're starting. They're sitting right here talking. They're not really paying attention. They're bored. They're kind of hidden behind these trees. And for your players, once they get close enough to the Kragma hideout, you can place them down on the map somewhere. So if you remember our little combat track, not the combat tracker, but the party sheet, and then we had the actual formation. So if I go back to the order tab, we already built this formation. So this is the formation they'll be in, facing north, if I place them on the map. So I can do that with the new formation tool. So I'm going to drag and drop this onto this location, being that this female wizard is in the very center, so they'll kind of fan out. So I'll probably put her token right here, and then the other guys will be up in here. So I'll drag and drop this here, and that's this little helmet thing. So I'll drop it right in this pocket here. And that's basically the formation I'm going to get. I didn't put the goblin in the formation because he's still kind of a NPC ally, but he is part of the group now since he's friendly. So he's going to tag along. I think he'll be near the front, telling them like what's going on, or giving them clues and such. So that's just a way to kind of set up the formation. But basically, they'll explore around, and then once the goblins are aware of them, if they have a fight, then there are some things that you're going to have to understand about the maps that can be a little confusing. So if you want to look at a given map that has line of sight built into it already, you unlock it on the top right, and then you want to move over to the symbol over here, which looks like a brick wall. This is the line of sight tool. And if you look at that, this would be something you do before your adventure, hopefully. This area here is open to the party, and they also have, access to the cave. It's not locked or anything. They can't see the goblins yet because this terrain is actually blocking them. So until they move up and over closer to the stream, it says if they go on the east side, they'll be able to see the goblins. I think that's true. If you move a token over there, it's going to reveal these tokens once they're, right now they're not visible. But if I turn these on in the combat tracker with these little eyeball here, these guys will be visible once the players get to the other side of that copse of bushes and trees. So it's just a matter of time before the combat ensues. So I want to go through some of the steps here. So we're at round 1. The goblins already have their initiatives. So I'm going to go to menu, go to initiative, and I'm going to roll for NPCs. So that'll take all of the NPCs and roll them in, and that will re-roll their rolls. And then I can go to the menu, go to initiative, and I can roll for the players since I don't have anyone connected. So this is the order that they go in. Goblin number 3 is our little buddy there, so he might point over in this direction and say, hey, there's usually guards over here or something like that. So he might go shh and point over there. So that might make everyone get quieter or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, so this is just a preliminary step. What I want you to notice, though, is when you're in the line of sight mode, you cannot interact with the tokens very easily because it's in a different layer. So if you want to interact or engage with tokens, you need to be in the play layer. And when you grab a token, you're going to see the lighting as the token does. So in this case, this is the goblin. Goblins more than likely have dark vision. Let me take a look at the stat block. Yeah, so they have dark vision. So if it was dark out, they'd be able to see. So let's simulate that. Maybe instead of the daytime, the party gets here at night. So if I go to the lighting tool and go to the ambient lighting, I can turn it on, and right now it's set to dawn. So I can go to moonlight, which will make it a little darker. And then I'll go back to the play mode. So when I want to preview what the players would see on the map with the token selected, I'm going to hit Control P, which gives me an idea of the limits of their vision range and what type of vision they have. So it's important as the GM that you select the player or the token that you want to see through. And I think that happens where you might have the wizard, and then you hit Control P and you're like, okay, that's her vision. Then you have the rogue. Let's see what his is. So it's a lot less because he doesn't have dark vision. So this is where it'd be like dim light in this case. So these are things that you'll have to keep in mind, but the key is to have the token selected. So as the game master, you will select whatever token is pertinent. Like if you wanted to know what these goblins are looking at, you have to click on them, and then you can turn on the player preview, and then move this around. You'll be able to see what they're able to look at. So this is important that you know to select the token that you're working with. If you leave it on the wizard and then you're working on, you say, hey, I can't see anything. Well, yeah, because you're not selecting the token that it belongs to. You want to go to Goblin 3 in this case. It's their turn. So that would be select this token. So the combat tracker does not select the lighting or the vision from the token that you're clicking on. And that's important to know that. So moving the combat tracker does not move the vision of the token you're looking through. And if you're a player that's running two characters, like in this case, you'll have the goblin and probably the human noble because he adopted him. So you're going to have to switch between both of these different tokens to get your true vision type. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially the game masters, because you got multiple things that you're keeping track of. Normally players don't have to worry about it. But you can select a token, and then if you click on it again, it deselects. So you're able to see more when you don't have the token selected. When you do have the token selected, then you're looking through the eyes of that token. And that's one of the biggest disconnects, I think, that the community has with line of sight and with the tokens, is they just don't understand how it works, or they're not practiced enough, or whatever it is. Just remember that. So if you are clicking on a token, that is the vision type for each token. So here the dwarf has dark vision. He's able to see farther away. The elf has dark vision. But this folk hero, the human noble, and the rogue do not. So the knight might say, or the human noble might say, I can't see a dang thing out here. So I'm going to go and double click on his token on the map. That'll bring up the character sheet. So if you accidentally close the map as a player or the GM and you don't have shortcuts, all you have to do is double click on the right hand side where the token is, and that will bring up the sheet. Or if you are over here in the combat tracker and it's your turn, let's say you're running the goblin, you double click on that little token, it's going to bring up where the map is, where you were last on. So that's essentially a shortcut if you accidentally minimize or close the window out. And the other thing is the DM can also right click and share the map with his players. So if I go to sharing, go to share record, this will share this map with the group. That's something you should do in the beginning. But if they lose it for some reason, you can do it again and it'll pop back up. But usually if they know to click on their token, or in this case the combat tracker, or maybe they have it shortcutted on the bottom, that's very helpful for them. So anyways, this is just a preliminary thing about lighting. So if one of these individuals wanted to light up something, they could cast a light spell, or maybe they light a candle so they can kind of see. But in this case, the goblin told them that there's probably guards over there, so they probably wouldn't light anything. So he might sneak over to take a peek to see what they're doing on his turn. So if I bring up his stat block, he has a stealth of +6. The goblins themselves have a passive perception of 9, so he should be able to make it, unless he rolls a 1. Yeah, he rolled a 20, what do you know? So he very carefully moves over. Now, in order to make the progress line, or the way to track the movement as a game master, players don't have to worry about this, but as a game master, you have to hit the Alt key. So you hold down the Alt key. You don't have to hold it the whole time, but just to get it started. And he's going to go across the river. And I think the river would slow him down anyway, so that's probably as far as he can move, because he kind of had to wade through there very quietly. And normally, when you're being stealthy like that, you can only move 15 feet anyways. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he's a sneaky little goblin. He knows the terrain. But in most cases, he would have probably had to stop here in the middle of the river. So I'm going to go ahead and hit or approve it. And what you noticed is he moved this 20 feet. But if I had changed the movement in the combat tracker, which we had mentioned a couple episodes back, if I change the movement option in Fantasy Grounds, it's going to change how far he's able to move. So at the time being, for the house rules here, the diagonal distance is at 1.5, which is correct, because if you move diagonally, you're going to move further than you would, vertically and horizontal, because of Pythagorean's theorem for the triangle. So what you want to do is, if you change this to default, and if you hold down Control and move again, it doesn't count. It doesn't necessarily count that extra space, and it will change the way. So if I move this and let this go, but then I'm going to turn this on to different movements. There's the raw movement rate. There's default. There's the ×1. So when you move this, it will change the way that it handles the way movement works. So if you move diagonally, you could tell a lot. So let me just kind of simulate that. So I'm going to hold the Alt key again and move this guy down quite a ways diagonally. We'll just say like this. Okay, that's 30 feet without the diagonal distance being accounted for moving diagonally. Now if I turn on the 1.5, he's moved 40 feet instead of 30. So that's the difference between the movement. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that movement and make sure that the diagonal distance is on 1.5. You can do it however you want, but I just wanted you to see the difference. So now I'm going to go ahead and hold Alt. Going to move him up and then over. And that would be where you'd have to stay had I not given him that extra 5 feet. So we'll just say he's moving here and he listens. And his turn first, he's stealthy. He's going to listen, see if he can hear his allies. So this will be his last move, essentially. So he does a wisdom check, which is perception, basically. And he's able to hear a little bit of noise, and he kind of puts his thumbs up to the rest of the party and says, hey, they're over here. So what would happen is maybe the party would pull out their weapons or whatever and prepare in case there's a fight. So then I'd hit the down arrow. The rogue is going to hide. So right off the bat, he's not going to take any chances. So he's going to slowly move close to the wizard on the other side of her, or on the other side of the dwarf. In this case, the wizard. So he moved very quietly, and then I'd have him roll his ability check for skill for the stealth. It's got a pretty good stealth, so I'm going to drag and drop it into the dice tower. And it will beat the number 9 if he rolls correctly, but he almost didn't. It was a 2 + 7, 9. So he just barely got in there. I don't tell him that, but I just tell him that you feel safe, but you were unsure of yourself. Maybe that'll give him a little bit of doubt if he's hidden. Because he doesn't really know he's hidden. He knows he's trying to hide, but doesn't necessarily mean he's hidden. But I know he is, because he's got that 9. So it was a 9 or higher he had to roll. So now I'm going to skip the turn. It goes to Goblin 1. Goblin 1 is just talking to the other goblin. They're not doing anything particular. The wizard is going to cast a spell. It's probably mage armor or something like that. So if I open up her character sheet and go to actions, this is where all her spells are. And I want to change the mode at the bottom from combat group to combat actions. And she has mage armor. So it's set to self, so I'm going to go ahead and cast it on her. So when I click on it, it'll add an extra AC of 3. And that'll give her more protection. So that helps her in combat in case. And then I'm going to check off manually what spell slot she used, which is the first level spell slot. So that's essentially her turn. she might, you know, move a little, but she's going to stay put. And that's her turn. She doesn't want to make a bunch of noise. The goblin or the rogue, he's basically hiding. And he does have some natural abilities here. So he has halfling nimbleness. He has the lucky feet or trait, and then he is naturally stealthy. So these are just things that you have to remember. So he can hide behind somebody that has a larger size. So that's the wizard's turn. So now the human noble is going to slowly move up. He's going to move stealthily if he can. He's going to be at disadvantage because he's wearing heavy armor. So I'm going to go ahead and first activate. Let's see. I'm going to go into here and go to his skills. I'm going to have him roll stealth. He'll be at disadvantage, but he's going to try. And he's only going to move 15 feet. He's going to be right behind the goblin, kind of squatting down or kind of standing, but lowering himself a little. And I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the stealth roll into the dice tower. So it automatically rolled with disadvantage, but even with disadvantage, he was still able to manage to keep quiet. So no squeaking and squealing from his armor. So he's there. He said he wants to pull out his weapon. So in this case, he has a javelin if he wants to throw something, and then he has his great axe. So he probably has his great axe sitting over his shoulder waiting. So this next fighter, the folk hero, she already has her special attack ready to go. So this is her longbow, and she has fighting style archery. So she's just going to drop back about 5 feet. And she's going to ready her bow. So if she sees anything come out, she's going to attack them with her bow. Goblin number 2 is just kind of kibitzing with his friend, who's not doing anything. Like the passage says that they don't notice the intruders yet, so that's his turn, essentially. I don't think he moves or anything. They're just talking to each other. Alright, so the cleric soldier is a dwarf. He's kind of wary of goblins, and he's going to take precautions. He doesn't want to wait. So in his actions tab, he has a couple options. So he's going to use a bless spell, which is one of his domain spells, but it still takes a slot. So I'm going to go ahead and cast bless, but I'm going to cast it on multiple targets. So what I want to do in this case, if they're in range, which they are, it's like 60 or 30 feet, he's going to cast it on all the guys that have kind of the squishy guys. So himself, the wizard, and the rogue. So he's going to hold down the right control key on the keyboard, and then he wants to click, or he's going to click on each one of his allies, including himself. So it says here in the combat tracker he has himself, the wizard, and the rogue targeted. Once he's done that, then he can apply this effect of bless. So I went ahead and did that. Now it applies that effect to each participant. It also has the concentration tag. So the concentration will be in effect, and if he takes damage, then the concentration will roll automatically for the check to see if he saves. If he doesn't save, the effect will drop from him and his players because he wasn't able to maintain the concentration. And now he's going to, he said he's going to pull out his Warhammer, and he's going to call it, he's just going to basically call it there that he's just going to stay put. He casts Bless. He's kind of just squatting there, getting ready. He's got his hammer, just in case, and he's got the concentration up, so he's kind of praying under his breath. So that's how that works in targeting, is you just hold down the right control key, or the alt key, or control key in this case, and then just click on your targets. As the GM, you have to make sure that the token is selected first, and then do your targeting on the other tokens. But sometimes, if you have them deselected like that and you try to do it, it doesn't work right. So you have to have the token selected and then start your targeting. And make sure you don't target yourself if you don't want that. But that's essentially his turn, and then we go up to the next turn. Now it's round 2. So I think he's going to sneak up a little bit more, maybe to the edge here, and take a little peek around the corner. If he's discovered, he'll probably just pretend like he's recon or something like that. And so he's squatting right here at the edge of this tree line. Yeah, he can see them clear as day. And they haven't noticed him yet, I don't think. So let me roll. So here's a stealth. He's probably crawling on the ground. Yeah, he makes it. So he's sitting there laying prone. So I'm going to put the prone condition on him because he's actually on the ground. So that's how he wanted to play it. So if I go to the effects up here on the top right, there's a condition called prone. So I'm putting that on him only simply because he's crawling around on the ground. He's trying to be stealthy. So essentially he's just kind of recon, and he kind of wiggles his leg to let the human noble know that they're right there. See, that's how he signals them. So the rogue is just going to pull out his bow. He is hiding right now. And if he gets an opportunity, he's going to do a sneak attack if one of these goblins comes out of that blind. So he's just going to hang tight and bid his time. And he says if he sees a target, he's going to shoot it with his bow. And he'll put a bead on it and see if he can do a lethal sneak attack on there. So goblin number 1 is still talking. He doesn't see anybody, he doesn't hear anything, so they're not alarmed yet. So the wizard is staying put. The human noble is going to try to cross the stream to get right here. We'll see what happens. So he moves up behind. And I'm going to stop him right there. And then I'm going to roll his stealth check. Because he is trying to sneak across. He almost slipped on the rocks. The stream is rather slippery. So he's not really the best at stealth, but he's going to give it a shot. This time, though, he failed, and so when he almost slipped, and then his armor made a squealing sound. So that brought the attention of the goblins now. So now this archer is going to move north, and then she's going to see if she can see what's going on before she does anything else. So I'm going to have her move. So essentially, she's moved up to where she can see this goblin here. She's going to take a shot at him, but she's going to be at a disadvantage because she has to shoot through her allies. So it's not disadvantage, but it'll be -2 to her shot, which will cancel out her range bonus. And then once I do that, I'll bring up her character sheet. And then I'm going to use the bow. So does she have that goblin targeted? No. So I'm going to have her target the goblin by holding down the right control key and clicking on the target. And it shows that in the combat tracker. So now I'm going to double click on the longsword, and that will, or the long bow, and that will execute the attack roll. So with the penalty and everything else, she misses. So she shoots through her allies and tries to hit the goblin, but it sails over his head harmlessly. So that's her turn, essentially. Goblin number 2, he basically moves up. Doesn't notice the little goblin there. He almost trips on him, and he ends up falling and rolling over. I'm going to have him make a dex save, or a dex check. Let's see. So he avoids the fall, but if he doesn't make this, he's going to lose his turn, but he's going to end up on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and he has a scimitar out too, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and make this stealth check here. Yeah, so that's a pretty good roll. So he almost trips over his little buddy, and he ends up going just opposite of him. And he pulls out his scimitar, and he looks confused, and he's like, he says something in Goblin. So I don't know if the noble or the folk hero know Goblin, but he says something in Goblin. So I'm going to select the token, drop down in chat, and select Goblin. And I'm going to type something here. Essentially, he says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And it says understood by nobody. So that means nobody in the party has Goblin as a language. So he's essentially saying that to this guy, and then he pulls out his sword and he attacks the noble. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag now this scimitar attack onto the human noble. And it's a complete miss. So he just kind of fumbles around and he pulls his blade out because he's kind of shocked. And he's not sure what's going on, but he tries to jab at his scimitar at the human noble, and the noble just kind of moves aside. So that's kind of how that works. And then when you hit the down arrow, now it's the cleric's turn, so he's going to move probably move him up one. And then he's going to potentially pull out his... He doesn't really have... He has hand axes that he can throw. I think he's just going to hold his turn. And I want to make sure his Dwarven Resilience is on, which is resistance to poison. So that's something I forgot to enable. So that he's essentially going to wait, and he can see the goblin. He can throw one of his hand axes if he wanted to, but again, he's going to have to throw it through his ally, so he's going to wait. So Goblin 3 is a little guy here. He's going to disengage. He's not going to attack or fight. He's going to get the heck out of there. So he will not get disadvantage or anything. He has Nimble Escape as one. So he can disengage or hide as a bonus action on each of his turns. So he's going to move into this thicket here, into the brush, and he's going to hide. So I'm going to go ahead and roll his stealth check again. Yeah, he rolled over, so they don't know exactly. They know he's in the woods, but they don't know where he went. So he's hiding, he's kind of squatting down in there, getting out of the action. So the rogue here might have a target. So let me hold down the Alt key and see what we get. So select the rogue. So I can also target from the combat tracker. This is Goblin number 2. So let me see if Goblin's... He's there. So let me drag this target from the rogue to the Goblin 2. What does it say? So now it's targeted. So I want to look to see what we have here. So it's 40 feet. He can shoot through his ally. So that'll be a -2. But he has advantage because he's hidden, and he hasn't been noticed yet or anything. And he's going to make his attack roll. So he has advantage even though he's at -2 because of his ally being in the way. And then he also kind of has some dim light, so that's kind of playing into his disadvantage or his actual roll. So we'll see what happens. But the -2 is definitely just. So I want to go ahead and roll his attack roll with his bow. So just double click on it because the target is already targeted. Wow, even with the bonus dice and advantage, it dropped to 3. He got an 8, so he missed his chance. So the goblin was too low or something. Maybe you couldn't shoot him, or maybe his friend was in the way, but he missed. Alright, so that's that guy's turn. He looks kind of... He probably feels kind of bad, but anyways. So goblin number 1 takes out his bow, and he targets the human noble. Alright. So, I'm going to go ahead and target him. So, the goblin number 1 grabs the target from the combat tracker, the little icon, and you can drag it to the human noble. So now once he's targeted, you can see he's 15 feet away. There is a little bit of cover there, so he's going to be at -2 because he has to shoot around these bushes or shoot through them. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click on the attack roll. He has a +4. So he missed. So he hit the leaves and the branches, and it just kind of bounced harmlessly off the noble's shield. So that's essentially his turn. He's going to move back 5 feet and call it good. I think he might even try to flee. We'll see. So the wizard is looking at this target. She doesn't want to waste her spells, but she is going to maintain her position and keep a lookout for any other goblins or so. She's going to look to the south and behind them, make sure they're not being followed or being flanked. So that's her roll, or her turn. I'm going to have her roll perception to see if she notices or hears anything or anything like that. So her perception is pretty decent, so I'm going to drag and drop this in here. So with the challenge rating I had in mind, which is 10 or higher, she doesn't notice anything extraneous. If she had noticed something, she might hear some of the dogs barking in this cave. There's some wolves in there, but she didn't hear that, so it wasn't loud enough for her. Alright, so the human noble is going to wade in. He's going to move up, and he has 2 targets he can potentially target, but he's going to go ahead and just go after this goblin that rolled over his ally. So I bring up his sheet, go to the Actions tab, Great Axe, he's going to swing it as hard as he can. Comes down on the goblin, right on his head with the blade. And then I'm going to drag the damage over. And he does, let's see, holy crap, 13 points of damage. He did 6 over what the goblin had. So the goblin has perished, he's gone. So that goblin is dead, essentially. And then on the combat tracker, you'll see it's unconscious, he's prone, and he is basically dead. So I'm going to delete him off the combat tracker. You don't have to delete them, but it frees up the resources, and it keeps it clean so you're not constantly scrolling past 100 different dead people. But you might want to leave like your bosses on there. Like if you have like a boss leader that might survive, you can leave them on the combat tracker. So I went ahead and deleted him. Now he's off the map and off the combat tracker. So the human noble is going to finish his turn up here, even though he can't attack. But he has a second wind, so if he gets any damage, he can use that ability. So we're going to pass the turn. So she's going to move in here, and this is the hero. So she can take a shot at him with her bow. And I'm going to go ahead and just double click. Actually, yeah, he's already targeted, so I just have to double click on her bow. So that is a hit. So she shoots right over the shoulder of her friend, or under the shoulder into the goblin. Now I'm going to double click on piercing, or for his damage. So he took heavy damage. He got a total of 10 on him. He's only got 1 point left, so he's wounded. He's got blood splurting out everywhere. And now this healer is going to move because he's afraid that they might need some healing. So he doesn't want to cross that river, but he has to. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt and just move him as much as he can. He could probably get to there at the most, and then call it good. So he's moved over that way. I'm going to untarget. So you do that by holding down the right control key and clicking on the targets again. So you just basically undo your targeting. That way, if I accidentally do a spell, it's not going to go on everyone on accident. So he kind of moves up there and pulls out his Warhammer. That's all he's going to do for right now. So goblin number 3 is still hiding. He's going to move stealthily to the south. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt. So he's moving stealthily, and I'm going to have him roll a stealth check. Yeah, so he's crawling on the ground in the woods. So I don't think anyone's going to see him, but that's what he's doing. So the rogue is kind of miffed, not very happy with his attack, but he's going to do a dash, which is basically essentially run over here, and that'll be basically his turn. So I'm going to have a move. And then he's going to hide. That's his turn. So goblin number 1 is going to just double click on his attack roll because he's right in melee range. He already has the noble targeted, so. And he missed, so the noble's able to bring his shield around to block the scimitar. So the goblin's in a lot of trouble. He might start calling out to the other guy, hey, help me out here. But he doesn't realize that he's already buddied up with the other guys. The wizard just passes on her turn. Human noble is going to make another strike with his axe. And it's a pretty deadly strike if he connects. Oh yeah, so that was another big blow. Oh my god, max damage. So that goblin's dead. So they essentially took out the sentries. The little goblin, he gets back up. So I will remove the prone condition because he stands up after he hears his former ally go down. So I'm going to have him stand up. And then I go to the effects over here and I'm going to remove the prone condition. So that's essentially how that played out. So if the cleric had taken damage, which I can emulate that, so let me just show you what happens. So I'm just going to damage him purposely just to show you. So I'll just say the goblin decides he wants to attack someone because he's frustrated. So he missed that time, but let's just say he hit. And then I'm going to take the damage roll and put it on the cleric. And what happened is Fantasy Grounds automatically rolled a concentration save. And in this case, he maintained concentration, so that effect will remain. Had he not been able to save, that effect would remove itself. So that's what's kind of cool about Fantasy Grounds. So there's some things that, that I can cover that might help your game a little, but that's essentially more of the a little bit more advanced stuff. Like I said, you got to kind of learn, how the map works, because when you're playing and you're clicking on the wrong token, you're going to say, hey, I can't see over there. Well, that's because you don't have the right token selected. And that's usually the culprit. Or the other thing is that these options are not turned on. I've seen people go to the forums and say, hey, the light of sight doesn't work. It works if you have it turned on. So that sometimes when you start a new adventure on a different map, they may not be turned on. So make sure of that. And then the other thing is they just might not have a light source. So for instance, this rogue, he could barely see anything. But had he a torch or something, we can go to the party sheet or to the effects. And we'll say since the battle's over, he's going to go ahead and light up a torch. He just drag that effect either onto his token or onto his combat tracker entry on the left over here. So I'm going to drag whatever. Let's see what he has in his inventory first. So here's the inventory. Let's see if he has a light source. Yeah, so he has 5 candles and he has oil and a lantern. So we'll grab the lantern and drag and drop that to him. So now it lights up that whole area. Yeah, so yeah, that's probably why they didn't light it up, because they didn't want to alert the guards. So anyways, that's essentially the three things to look out for. So they have to have a light source, or there has to be enough ambient light. So with the moonlight, if I kill basically if I dim the light or get rid of this lantern by going into effects and just minusing that out. Now, if he puts it on himself, the player, he can remove it himself. If you, as the game master, put it on him, you have to remove it. So anyways, he's sitting there in the dark. So that's considered dim light, which could affect his ability to target and to see things. So you could be at disadvantage or -2 or whatever. Usually it's disadvantage if you can't see. But you can figure out what you want to do with that as a game master, whatever you think seems fair. But it is a challenge to kind of get the perception down of who knows what, when, and where. So that is basically some of the combat that you could come across. And again, when that combat's over, I could go to the party sheet, and then I'm going to bring up that encounter. And then I'm going to come down to XP, drag and drop this goblin blind into this part. And then I can go back to my handy dandy loot here and drag another one of those over. So if I go to the loot table that I loaded earlier, the third party, I can essentially bring up a parcel. Okay, so these are goblins. So again, just take this and drag it over twice, since you have more than one goblin if you want. And that'll just double up everything. And at this time, they may want to keep some of this stuff. So I will say that the wizard wants to keep the goblin teeth for like spell components, and the folk hero wants the arrows. So when I do that, that preserves that link, and it will be assigned to them once we sell it. So if they go into town, they can get a better price or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and sell the content for 50%. And then these two items, since they're claimed, when I hit the down arrow, it will put that stuff into their inventory. So when you go to the character sheets, they should have those. So if I go to the wizard and go to her inventory, yeah, here's the goblin teeth right here. So she's got a handful of teeth here. So these are just some of the things that you might do during the course of a game. And then once that plays out, maybe if you run out of time, this would be a good stopping point. Because if I unlock this and turn off the lighting and such, you're getting into the mouth of the cave. So you might have to, do this in a few sessions. It may be more than just one additional session. So I would think 2 sessions should be able to clear out this dungeon if you're proficient and you know what you're doing. Of course, there's role-playing and dice rolls that make a difference, but nonetheless, this is what you'd look at. Then I want to make sure I turn this back on, and then I can turn off the enable player vision, just so I have an idea of what's coming up next. There's the kennel where the dogs are, so that's the next thing. So there's an encounter with some wolves. Bring up the wolves, read their stat block a little bit to get an idea of their tactics and how they work. And then on the other tab, it might have information, might not. Might have a picture you can share. So it just depends on how you want to run this. But essentially this is would be, you know, session 2, and then maybe session 3 will be to finish up the caves. So that depends on your pace and the familiarity with your group. But I think that's all I'm going to do today. I think I've been rambling for over an hour, so I think that should work. So again, watch the other videos if you missed out, and then at least the last one, and then I'll do 1 or 2 more of these, and then we'll call it a series. So take care, everyone.